Vanessa Lucchesi, con cui abbiamo già parlato altre volte. Stiamo facendo una serie di interviste chiacchierate sulla sua ricerca, fatto sugli italiani, l'importo degli immigrati italiani nel calcio in South Australia. Buon pomeriggio, Vanessa. How are you?
Buon pomeriggio. Okay, how are you?
Okay, we're sticking with this buon pomeriggio. That's good.
Yes, that's the extent of the Italian for today.
for today, that's okay. Bene, allora, so we've already talked a bit about the early history of Italian clubs in South Australia and other ethnic groups, and a little bit about methods and why this is even an interesting subject for history. Now, reading your thesis, there's a big chapter that talks about ethnic agency. I think we know the word ethnic, it doesn't get used a lot nowadays, but agency. What is this? What do you mean by agency?
Well, being an ethnic migrant in that time, I think a lot of things were probably out of their control. They're in a new land, they're trying to master a new language, they're trying to learn a new way of life. Like living in Australia is very different to living in a tiny little village in Italy. So ethnic agency is kind of the concept of taking control of things that they can't really do in a bigger, wider society. And soccer was a place that migrants could take control of things. And by doing so, they actually increased the standard of soccer in the state. And you can see similar trends basically in every state that migrants started soccer clubs.
Okay, so this idea of agency is about having control of your life or what you do.
Yeah. Yes.
And why is that important?
Well, I think, agency is...
You've already explained it a little bit, but let's tease it out a bit more.
Well, agency is important to everyone. Like just you and I now in a society, agency is important to us. But I think when you're coming into a society where you're quite different, having agency and even a sense of autonomy is really important to just keeping you grounded and reminding yourself that you are valid and you are important and you can change things. You have the power to change things. So that's why I think it was very important that ethnic migrants had agency through soccer.
Okay, so that helped give the sense of meaning and purpose in their lives, because you said that life can be very different from being in a little village. Some will be on the mountains, some on the seaside, but little village compared to a fairly large city, Adelaide. It wasn't maybe not enormously developed, still much larger than most of the places where people came from to Italy, to Australia from Italy. And how then does soccer, these clubs, help with this agency concept you're talking about?
Well, it gives a place for migrants to put in their opinion, to kind of have things changed. And there was a really big example, this is more to do with soccer in South Australia in general, where the game changed from kind of amateur soccer to semi-professional soccer. And it was an event called the Split, basically. And it was when it was kind of when a lot of ethnic clubs were doing quite well, and they had bolstered the number of spectators at games, because obviously with migrants, they come in groups, lots of people come to watch, and they raised the standard of soccer in the state. So lots of people coming, and then what happened is, I think there was a general meeting, and I think the board at the time, which was quite Anglo, said something or rather, and most of the ethnic clubs didn't like what they said, and they walked down, they started their own federation. And the clubs in the federation, there were 7 ethnic clubs, which were, just reading from my thesis, Belgrade, which is obviously Serbian, Budapest, Hungary, Croatia, Juventus, which is current Adelaide City, Lion, which was Ukrainian, Orange, which was Dutch, and Polonia, which was Polish, and then one Australian team, which was Cumberland. And they started a whole new federation, and as time evolved, lots of other clubs started to come to this federation because they knew, well, the ethnic standard of soccer is really good. There are lots of spectators, and basically ended up merging one day to form the South Australia Soccer Federation.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
that's
Now,
a big example.
yeah, let's take a step back there. You said something about the size of crowds that was different in different types of games. What's the story there? What's the data there?
Well, the data there is quite a lot. I have to go through my thesis. There are a lot of numbers here.
But the basic point I think you're saying is that the games where these ethnic, they're all migrants anyway. It's just maybe
they are maybe continental European migrants, should we say. So if we look at some of the statistics here, it says in the pre-war days, soccer matches were sparsely attended. Ernie Donaldson, who played for the South Australia kind of state teams in the early 1930s, stated that only 150 to 200 spectators would be drawn to a first division game.
150 to 200.
Which isn't a lot. But then by contrast, the next statistic I found that in 1950, a game between Belgrade and a migrant team from the hills drew a crowd of 1,000. And then a game from games from 1956 to about 1959, as many as 4,000 people came to watch.
So 10 times.
10 times, yeah. Massive increase in crowd numbers.
So that's coming from this concept, what's related to this concept of social capital that you've talked about with us earlier on. So people bringing people together and aggregating. And okay, so you said bigger games, I guess more revenue, more income for clubs. But the established association or league wasn't particularly happy with
they wanted to keep the game at an amateur level, whereas the migrants wanted to kind of push for professional, semi-professional. And I think, well, the split, interestingly enough, the split in South Australia that happened in 1961 was kind of, it was one example of an earlier split that had happened in New South Wales, and that was like a really big deal. So I think what had happened is migrant clubs were really dissatisfied with what was happening in New South Wales, and I'm pretty sure the Jewish club Hakoah had finished top of the table in the second division, but they were denied promotion to the first division.
Oh, really?
And that's why they then broke away and they formed the New South Wales Federation of Soccer Clubs.
Okay, so there's probably evidence of discrimination along ethnic roots. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So and maybe as you're implying, there was a different attitude, different interest in developing the game. So these continental European clubs and the interest was much deeper, much stronger than the existing organisations. Okay. Well, now we have to have a break now to hear some messages from our sponsors, and we'll come back to speak to Vanessa Lucchesi.